if you compare the pictures that have emerged in these 2 days, it is a duty, I think, at the end to have, you have in mind so many things, so many messages. Squalor and opulence, we have been jumping from one to the other. Sometimes we saw this beautiful future, sometimes we saw complete disaster in front of us. Well, that is manifested in territorial inequalities, the long and the short of it. Territorial inequalities which have increased very strongly, and in a sense, the votes that are coming, people can vote with their feet, they can vote with their voice, or they can vote with just by putting a ballot vote, and that's how they're voting. So that is certainly true that a wake-up call has been sent, and somebody got it. However good, yesterday we heard global potential for good, unprecedented reduction in world inequalities. We should always remember that. We should remember that there is a connection between our increase in inequality and the reduction of inequalities across countries. Within countries, territorial inequalities have grown, and the message has arrived straightforward to the top business elites. Unless policymakers grapple seriously with the problem of regional inequality, the fury of voters for Brexit and for Mr. Trump will only increase. It's The Economist who is blaming in this issue, blaming the old policy of how big corporations set their headquarters. What will I do? I'll deal mostly with policy. I will try to show you that it can be done, that there is a way to go about, that is being done according to somehow a conceptual framework, okay, that tells us where we're going and allows us to adjust along the way. My reference is to a rural-urban divide for two reasons. First of all, because it is particularly relevant these days, as the votes show all over, from Austria to France to Germany and to Italy. Very interesting, the differential of votes in Italian rural and urban areas. But also, quite frankly and honestly, because we have a strategy there. So I got something to tell you about, rather than simply saying what it should be done. I can tell you what is being done. First, a recap, my own personal recap. I don't like the word populism. I prefer Karen Stennert, one of the moral psychologists, which were mentioned yesterday. She's writing with Jonathan Haidt at the moment. She called it authoritarian dynamic. Is at work everywhere. It's made of intolerance for diversity, plus a call for closed nations or closed communities, together with we repeated it several times during this symposium, a mistrust for institutional experts, but also at the same time a call for tough authorities sanctioning deviant behavior. The dynamic, the authoritarian dynamic that Karen Stennert conceives as the interaction of context changes and individual psychology. I will not go into that, but it's very interesting. I strongly recommend her book. This dynamic can be traced back somehow to the unequal distribution of both the benefits and the cost of the system changes. Inequalities and threats have hit large share of the Western population, what Adani Rodri called the losers of globalism. The first one is very well known, economic inequalities, we talked about a lot. Social inequality has more to do with the foundational economy. The access and quality of people to fundamental services has deteriorated, or rather, there has been a split between people having improvement in quality and worsening of it. But I attract your attention to the recognition inequalities that present a bit of a bridge with Ricardo's point. Is German. This is German philosophers. It comes from Germany, but is now sort of back on the stage. Is your perception, is one's perception of one's values being recognized? Okay, you could be a worker. Is my job in a manufacturing company considered to be fundamental for society or not? Or might be a rural guy. I mean, what do people think of people living in rural areas? Is my values, my norms, but it's also the feeling of being of your leaders and your institutions recognizing your aspirations. You can have recognition inequalities without economic inequalities. And if we don't single out recognition inequalities, we miss part of the story and we do not understand the reaction. Now, these inequalities have a class component, labor versus capital, there's no doubt about it. But they also have a very strong territorial dimension. Is static or falling behind town cities versus thriving town cities, peripheries versus urban centers, and rural, or as you will see, inner areas versus urban areas. What I mean by rural, I will have a different definition, but the common definition, the very well designed definition recently by the Habitat, UN and European Commission, which have now a fantastic grid for defining it, says that in the Western world, both in the US and in Europe, about 30%, around 28% of the population live in what we can call, in terms of density and size, rural area. You can see that the degrees stopped around the 81. We are not using in Italy this definition, I will tell you why. But this gives you a vague sense of what it is. Remote inner, just to be clear, refers not to the density, but to remoteness from services, okay? So, rurality traditionally refers to density and size, while innerness refers to remoteness for services. The two things tend to coincide, but they might not necessarily coincide. In rural areas, those three kind of inequalities that I mentioned before have taken a particular shape. Economic inequalities, the industrialization, I don't need to talk about it here, displacement of labor-intensive agriculture, forestry, grazing, for capital-intensive one, and an outflow of younger skilled people. But, if we look at numbers, the gap in poverty, for example, between rural and urban areas, which is still unfavorable to rural areas, has decreased after the crisis, for obvious reasons, which have to do with the resilience of rural areas or people going back to agriculture. It has significantly decreased the gap, okay? So, you know, we're not that happy about the fact that their anger is linked to economic inequalities, much more linked to social inequalities. I will just mention it, you'll see some data on that. They have to do with a dramatic shift of public and private services to the cities, towards the cities, and recognition inequalities. Let me stop again one tiny bit more on here. The role of rural people as guardian, I'm using this word because in the British language it was very much used in the rural debate. The role of people living there as guardian, or better, regenerator. Guardian seems like you're guarding something which is unchanged. Regenerator of a paysage and environment is very often unrecognized. Their specific needs for services, or better, the capacity that the new technologies, the extraordinary capacity that the new technologies have to improve the quality of people living, of the health, education and mobility of people in rural areas has not been addressed. And finally, a strong sense of disrespect for their values, okay? They're often areas treated by urban elites, like most of us here, as places providing entertainment for the urban people, and that is deeply disliked by people in rural areas. And the metrophilia, of course, impinging on their head. There is no future for us, only you have a future. And then the threat of cosmopolitan diversity, that kind of lovely thing that we love and our children love traveling through the world. Often they don't. Okay, these are my claim. In order to come to policy, I have to argue something, that this is part of the result of policy. If I were to believe that this was not the result of policy, but it was the result of unavoidable trends in technology, globalization, then I might be afraid I may not have anything to say. Policy cannot counteract systemic, unbeatable changes. So system changes certainly have a responsibility in increasing inequalities of rural areas, but policies did a very good job in magnifying this effect, not counteracting it and magnifying it. These are the three policies that went wrong. That helps us shaping a policy that can go right, okay? We talked a lot about the second one, public investment. This is my own way of saying it. It's public investment passively accommodating agglomerations led by corporate decisions. This is not an issue of a small state. The World Bank report, Geography Report 2009, did not claim for a small state. It claimed for a very big state. This is a mistake that we often make, state versus market. Why? Because urbanization and that kind of dream of 50% of the population of the world living in big cities requires an enormous amount of public funds for sewage, for roads, for schools, and at one point of the game for security, because you have too many people and people are struggling one against the other. So it's very costly. The claim of this approach, which is the degeneralization of the new geography approach, is the state, an issue we discussed a lot today, the state is ignorant, cannot cope with the complexity of the knowledge of this present, but corporation can. And here they have a very good point. Corporations are a phenomenal, that's why I don't like this 0-1. Corporations are a fantastic machinery for extracting knowledge, because they have to sell something not only to the consumers, but they have to make sure that they can guarantee that it has not been produced with the labor of 10 years old, and then have the environmental impact. So the story goes that corporations have to take into account all the knowledge that there is, and the final decision is somehow a good compromise. The mistake with this is the mistake with this theory is very simple, that they do not maximize the general welfare. They quite rightly, in capitalism, they better maximize profits or power managers or profits to shareholders. So the problem with this approach is that the needs of all the people or the opportunities of rural areas were not disregarded. They were simply not taken into account enough in the balance of the decision making. So the lost opportunities of rural areas was not in the machinery of this corporation, and they better not be. Let me say that. Capitalism works if everybody does its job, okay? That's everybody, this holistic approach of the corporation should be socially responsible. Yes, they can be up to a point, okay? They have to do their job and making profits. They better do for us. So and this approach has disregarded a little tiny detail, that the negative externalities of agglomeration were bumping on some people, and the positive externalities on others, which is peripheries versus centers. Okay, but that we talked a lot about. There is something we haven't enough, I think, talked about. I'll just mention it, which is space-blind institutional reforms. This country has excelled in this space blindness. All the new public management came from New Zealand and then here, which has actually given us an extraordinary bag of fantastic tools, outcome indicators, and more result-oriented, which I love, I'll come back to it, but it has also had this anti-Hayekian idea that public administrators and technocrats can design fantastic mechanisms that can deliver by just making sure that people act, consumers working out act. The space-blind institutional reforms, remember we're talking about rural areas, were designed always by urban people. So they were apparently space-blind, i.e. they were not taking into account the specific needs of rural areas, but they were not. They were designed, the adjustment of the health system, the adjustment of the education system, the adjustment of the mobility system were thought for the people about which people like me know about, which is the towns, the big cities, the big cities, right? So they had a very strong anti-rural bias, which explains why new technologies have not been employed, except in places like Finland, where the dramatic nature of needing to occupy that territory for geopolitical reasons has made the leading class of Finland being very aware that new technology should be used. Okay, it's geopolitics all the time. I wrap up this negative part of my presentation, then I come to the positive one, with a third very important policy. Since these two policies have obviously failed and produce inequalities, they call to help a third policy, which made the disaster even larger, which I call compassionate compensations. Rather than adjusting what was wrong in the two policies, we said, we have lots of people angry. Angry in the rural areas, angry in the peripheries. What shall we do? Let's throw money at them, lots of money. Cohesion policy for a long time in Europe was nothing but that. And this money was transferred and is still being transferred to these areas through who? The famous intermediaries that I've been talking about. And we have transformed, this policy has transformed municipalities and intermediaries into rentiers. Because they have become the only guys in town that can actually guarantee to the people that their troubles will be solved for how long? A couple of years, of course. Whether it is incentives or training or infrastructure, they're not thought for the people. They're thought to make labor, employment, to keep people happy. So as with an institutional approach, I'm thinking about Acemoglu and Robinson, this particular third approach has done enormous damage by limiting and postponing endogenous adjustment and people's anger. People's anger did not materialize. They were kept quiet by money. And it has helped the degeneration of the public administrators that you have been talking about in most of the presentation. Okay, if this is the case, we need a new policy, and this is it. This policy needs to deal with two problems, knowledge and power, as all policies. So what about knowledge? The idea that many of us have that have been having for a long time is not my stuff. This is stuff that has been coming up in Poland, in Hungary, in Norway, in Austria, in this country, not just in academia. It has been come about by doing things, okay? Knowledge is embedded in places, in its inhabitants. A big part of the knowledge needed to decide how to move ahead, how to innovate, how to develop. But for it to produce innovation, there needs to be conflict. Conflict, let me use this blunt word, conflict. I mean, in a corporation, ask the board of administrators how they come up with a very good solution to go on the Chinese market. A conflict from engineers. Only conflict produces innovation, not knowledge. Knowledge is static. So you need a conflict, you need debate. And also you need not to be closed in your community, because global knowledge, the one that Ian and others have brought to the fore in these 2 days, is very important, and we can't segregate ourselves. So you need to relate, and this global knowledge can come to places in two ways, either by people traveling, yes, it was mentioned several times, or by these places connecting to competence centers outside. This is it's quite simple. Huh? And power, which as an economist we call it political economy. We have two problems. Why should local elites behave and do a policy that extracts knowledge and produce innovation? And why should the national or supranational government do it? If we do not address this question, we're not going to have a policy. We're going to have silly recommendations. That will not be, because we're not thinking about the incentive mechanism. Now, the local elites, as Acemoglu and Robinson have repeatedly shown to us, are part of the solution. We cannot do without them, because they are the democratically elected representative of us. At the same time, they're part of the problem, because they do not want innovation. They do not deeply want innovation, because they have power, and they know that if there is innovation, their power might be threatened, because the innovators might come up. So we have a problem. We need to empower them. At the same time, we need to make sure that they do not impede innovation. At the same time, the external elite, Brussels or London or Cardiff, why should people at supranational, national, state or regional level care? Well, you know, they are tempted by a very simple thing, which is an exchange. I give you the money, I give you compensating, I give you money to the municipalities, and in return you give me money, you give me votes. This is a short-term exchange. This has always happened. So compassion and compensation are very much liked by national governments, because that's the game in town. I mean, the old story about Scotland, when the big discussion on Scotland out or in this big country, was all about, is it better for us to be paid by Brussels or London? And Scotland said, no, we're better to be paid by Brussels, because it's a power game, okay? Where is my negotiating power stronger? Who do I want to depend on? So unless we address this issue, we go nowhere. So we need to design a policy, and this is the policy in one slide, because I want to then move. The place-based approach, as defined in what we have been doing, is an approach aiming at giving people in a place, I'll come to what a place is, because that's the most important issue. What is a place? Giving people in a place stuck in an underdevelopment trap, i.e. not exploiting yet their opportunities, the access and quality of essential services, the foundational economy, but also the opportunity to innovate, i.e. what Amartya Sen called the substantial freedom, as Kevin said it, a more capacious definition of development. To do what? Because this is a very important point. Not to stay in a place, but to be truly freely to decide whether to stay or to leave, which they are not today. Because if you have obstacles to develop your innovation in Welsh or in the south of Italy, then you're not free to move. You have to move out. You have to exert exit and give up on the potential of your own person. So it's not a policy which builds new things from outside. It's a policy that liberates and reduces the obstacles to services, education, health and mobility, most of all, and the obstacles that young people have for innovation, obstacles presented by the old people, blocking their path. So this policy calls for a very strong role of the national or supranational government to play, you will recognize Adam Smith in these words, the role of a fair and impartial spectator. This is exactly the concept. So it is not a policy of decentralization. Decentralization is shifting the responsibility to the local level. That's not what we want, because we do know that they're part of the problem as well as part of the solution. So we need a very active, invasive, or as Amartya Sen would say, paternalistic national government. I'm quite frank about it. It has to be equipped with this capacity. To do what? 7 things. It has to build the place where there is conflict. That's the most important thing of all. There has to be a space for a heated, informed, full of numbers, full of evaluation of schools, and anything else, open to the outside, open to competence centers, open to the corporation, and reasonable. By reasonable, I could spend here, I mean non-rational in the sense of Amartya Sen and Jonathan Haidt. Rationality is a self-referential issue. Reasonability is when you relate to the others, you appealing to other people's sentiments. So otherwise there is no debate. To build what? To build what? To build a vision of the future. A shared vision of the future. I'll get into that in my example. Second, you are entrusting the local elites with the responsibility. They are running the game. You're not creating Holmstrom special purpose institutions. That's neo-feudalism. The Holmstrom way has proved to be wrong. So you need to entrust the people who democratically elected. You need to give the people the chance to vote them out, not to create another body that has all the power. So you have somebody you elect with no money, and then you give him money to somebody who is not elected. So you entrust the local elite, but also you are ready to destabilize them. Whenever they try not to have a heated, informed, open, and reasonable debate, you say the table is over. You're not getting a penny. You're off the game. Third, you got to draw the boundaries. What is a place? It's how big it is. 50, 70. Where are the boundaries? Not administrative boundaries, but not even functional boundaries. We know that in every sectorial approach, there is one functional boundary. So you go to a labor economist, it's, of course, it's the local labor system. You go to an environmentalist, it's, of course, it's the river area. No, you don't want any of those. You want to have a boundary which is part of the strategy. The first thing that people have to come and decide is where is the boundary? Where is the identity? Where is the boundary that comprises enough people that we can actually share a vision? Point number 4, outcome indicators everywhere. You build them, you make sure that people, whenever they open their mouth and whenever they articulate a vision, they turn it into something that can be actually changed and measured. If they don't, then that's off the table. Point number 5, you as a state, as a fair and impartial spectator, you are a Hayekian, in the good part of von Hayek. You admit you are terribly ignorant. But if you are terribly ignorant, you don't write. And this country has done, and we have copied England, and we have done it much worse because our public administration is not at the level of yours. So you can imagine what we did when we tried to copy you in writing an enormous amount of regulations and indicators and ruling. But that implies that the government assumes that he knows all the rules of the game until the end of it. No, you don't know. You need to set at the beginning some what Oliver Hart would call incomplete contract. Some principal contracts that need to be filled during the experimentation. Yes, because policy making is about learning, first of all. You learn, you adjust the rules, you will apply them, you will adjust them. That's the way, that's the modern way, what my friend Chuck Sable called democratic experimentalism. Point number 6, but what do you put on the table in the municipalities? Well, you put on the table You are the national government. You put on the table your availability to make your sectoral policy space aware. Not to issue that education reform, identical for the whole country, or anyway, you have already decided how it will be adjusted here and there. You've got to make it adjustable, okay? That's your part of the commitment in the contract. And finally, human resources. As it emerged 2 days ago, I think, in the symposium, and I'm stressing that again myself, this new way of doing public administration requires a completely different kind of human people. Equipped with moral psychologists, we need anthropologists, we need people who know how to write. They need to be reading, they need to be philosophers. We don't need only economists and lawyers. Yes, we need statisticians, because I'm a statistician. We need a lot of statisticians. But we need people who know how to run a focus group. We need an administration that is on the ground. This is the policy. Okay, we implemented it in Italian rural areas. Let me tell you one thing about rural areas, which has to do with Riccardo's point on diversity. Italian rural areas, I have to admit, have an advantage, which has to do with diversity, which starts with nature. I developed as a statistician an index which is called index of roughness, which it's an index of how uneven the territory is. Unevenness has natural effects. That means that territory which are 2 or 3 kilometers one from the other are exposed to sun and humidity and wind in a very different way. Well, that means that different seeds coming from Middle East, South America, or Asia can grow at 2 kilometers from the other. This is what Italian food is all about, okay? This is what Italian culture in these areas is all about. It's a mixture of Albanese, of Greek people come from everywhere around the world that somehow have found the little niche in terms of nature, okay? That's not common. And this is important for capitalism, because those 400 million new bourgeoisie coming from China and India, they want diversity more than the Japanese used to. They asking for diversity in food and diversity in their experiential tourism. They like to have each of them needs to want to do something different from all the others. So this is creating an opportunity from these areas that explains why in the rural areas of Italy we have many small but widespread signals of young people coming back to these places and creating innovation in welfare, lots of new welfare. For example, offering welfare to the people in urban areas that have gone crazy, or to young people in prison of the age of 15 that are given a chance to get out of the urban context. So a lot of these things not decided by the state. These are entrepreneurial activities, okay? At the same time, though, those 3 policies I've mentioned and the system changes have been stronger. So overall, these areas have gone down very badly, in spite of these innovative signals. So you have innovative signals, not enough to trigger an endogenous change in the market place and in the democratic mechanism. So they vote with their feet, demographic decline, and they vote in the ballot box. There is, in the center and north, there is a 5 points. This is something completely new. I just finished. We haven't published it yet. There is a 5 points differential between the 2 so-called populist parties and the other parties in the rural areas, more than in the urban areas. So we decided to launch a strategy in 2012 during the Monti government, and the strategy was in Karen's sort of structure aimed even in the definition of what the inner areas are, was aimed at essential services. So we decided we don't want the definition of density. We want the definition in terms how far are people from a full supply of school, health, and access to the railway system. These are the 3 indicators. You can be at 75 minutes, 40 minutes, 20 minutes. The greener you are, the farthest away you are. It does tend to coincide with altitude. You see that the remote areas and the ultra-remote are 600 meters high. But you also have very flat areas like the delta of Po. Okay? So it does not coincide with altitude. And then look at the two maps of the demographic decline. The red is the decline, green is demographic increase. On the right, you have the inner Italy, and on the left, you have the flat Italy, and you can see. Again, what is interesting is distance matter, but institutions do matter. I will repeat this point in another chart. Look at Trentino Alto Adige, the north of Italy. It's inner area, but it's all green. That was a policy. There was also a lot of money, because we have to make sure that there wouldn't be terrorism by the Alto Adige, but there was also money, was very well used. It's all green. People are moving in. People are reproducing there. And also in some area of Tuscany, the same. Okay. This is my map of what we did. Don't worry, there is not much else after that except a few data and two focus. This is the application of the place-based approach, which we have been doing since 2012. So what did we do? Well, first of all, as coherently with what I said before, we took a year and a half, and I'll tell you how we did it, to define each place or project area as an alliance of municipalities. Look, this is the map that came out. It took a year and a half. It was not, as they do in France, a management des territoires. It wasn't us in Rome deciding what would be the areas. It was the result of this process here that I described here. We decided that every area would benefit from 3.8 million euros, whether there were 5,000 people or 60,000 people. Why do you do that? Because you need an incentive mechanism. If we had made the amount of money available linked to the size, we knew what would have happened. They would have come unreasonably together to get more money. So we said, we create a discouragement to become big. In fact, we have areas, on average, of only 29,000 inhabitants. And then, after we set this amount of money for experimenting new way of producing health, new way of producing education, we made a public call to areas, private sector, public sector, regions, municipalities, whoever could come along, providing they had some criteria in complete contract. There should be contiguity. They should mostly be inner areas. We would prefer areas with a very strong demographic decline. And we asked them, please, forget about your technical assistants. Just shut them out of the room. You mayors with the people, sit down in a room and write your vision or what you want to be 30 years from now. And see whether you convince us that you have something in mind. Where would the people of this area live off in 30 years from now? Reasonably. And what kind of services you would like to have? And then we asked them, hey, you have to choose a leader. It's many of you. We can't deal with 15 mayors. And we don't want to set a new administrative border. We want you to have a person responsible for a strategy. He will be the person we'll be speaking to. He'll be responsible from now onwards. You can't choose it, you're not going to work with us, okay? Then we run a focus group. We travel to the place. Can you imagine a group of people, of a mix of people from public administrations, education ministry, health ministry, heritage ministry coming all together. Then we recruited people from outside, much younger on average. The average age of this was probably about 42. The young people we recruited were about 28. It came together with a group of 50 people. We traveled to the places. We did about 50,000 kilometers in buses, which turned out to be, we hadn't planned it. We turned out to be the best thing to do for training. Amazing training, amazing creation of amalgama among these people. We traveled to the places. We held focus group. We were very invasive. We were very noisy. We, as I told you yesterday, we had our data. We had an enormous bunch of data. We had 140 indicators for each of these areas, including evaluation of the performance in mathematics and reading for each school of each of these areas. We didn't give it to them. You have to play. You have to play a game. And we told them, tell us about what do you think of your schools? What do you think should be done? What is really you need? And some of them talk about blah blahs. And then we said, well, it looks like you have two schools when your kids in mathematics don't seem to be able to come out at the age of 14. They will have 70% of their chances in life off forever. And then they look at each other, and the look was, oh, they're real. These are people from Rome, from the education ministry. They're coming here. They're traveling, but they're also real, meaning they know about us. So we have to play a real game. Okay, that's the way we created the areas. And the map is this one. You can see that it's 72 area projects, about 1,000 municipalities and mayors, 29,000 per area. 3% of Italian population, 17% of Italian territory, where most of big things happen. Think about Liguria. You read probably on the newspaper that Genova sometimes is flooded and people die. Why do you think people die in Genova? Because nobody's taking care of the land above Genova. So these 4 areas represent the attempt to recreate the guardians and the responsibility for the people on which the life of Genova, i.e. of a big city, depend. Okay? We started the process of debate. We promoted a Sen-like, I call it a Sen-like public debate. We destabilized, if you have questions, I'll maybe answer later on this issue. We built a mixed team. We tried as much as we could to adjust the sectoral policies for education to the needs that were emerging from the areas, so that they would become permanent adjustments, not temporary projects like those financed by structural funds, which are a disaster because a group of young people maybe moves up, of young couples moves to a place thinking that there is good school, thinking that there is a good bus, and then 3 years after they are told that the money of the European Union is over. Means you have not entered the working of, you have not adjusted, you have not made the working of the sectorial Ministry of Education permanently space aware. Okay, you're doing temporary patching up, and then we created a network of across the places. Just give you a couple of numbers. It's always useful. At the top, you see the change in population, which is dispersed. So, but I want to show you one more thing that shows institutions matter. Okay, this is a very important indicator. This is the time between the call of the emergency and the arrival of the emergency in the place, okay? So this is 16 minutes that is the Italian average, is our minimum level of services according to our constitution. On this axis, you see the number of minutes that it takes on average from each of the 72 areas. The red ones are south, the black ones are north and center. It says the number of minutes that it takes for a car to arrive in a big center. So you see there is some correlation, but for the same level. Take, for example, 45 minutes distance. You have this area, which is exactly 60 minutes, and then you have a dispersion, meaning that they have, that some project areas, in spite of being very far away from the big centers, have designed a system of emergency that can actually deliver a number of minutes that is coherent with people wanting to live there. These are fundamental things. People don't go and live in these areas. There are many entrepreneurs that are moving in these areas. Okay, you don't want to live there if you know that if you have a small heart attack, you die because the ambulance doesn't arrive. These are strongly related to competition and innovation. And the same is true for inappropriate hospitalization rate. We have amazing numbers in Italy. Inappropriate meaning is people with diabetes or asthma that get hospitalized. Costly, useless, and bad. People feel what does it mean? That they do not have a territorial support. So you see again the dispersion, and you can also see how this way of thinking focuses the people's attention of the areas on the things that they want to improve. And it is up to them to decide. These are, I will not go through them, you can read them. These are examples of outcomes that people have come up with. In this discussion, very often it was made the point that it is somebody from outside arriving and telling what is good for you, okay? I don't believe in letting a place going in its own way, so we arrived, we have had our indicators, We pushed them in some directions, but at the end of the game, they chose what to do. They chose what their aim was, and you can read their aims. These are outcomes that can be measured, that represent a sample of the kind of outcomes that they come up with in drawing the strategies. The last 2 points. Until now, I have not touched on one small issue. I told you before, why should the national government want to do this? Why is the national government wanting to overcome its temptation to give cheap, rapid effects, okay? This stuff takes an enormous amount of time. Look how long it was to do it. A place-based approach does not tolerate speeding. It has taken 5 years, 5 years, from the moment that during the Monti government we launched it to the moment in which the first 9 areas drew the strategy and chose the project and now have the money to implement them. 5 long years. So the real big question, and while you know perfectly well that if I transfer money for training, in 3 months' time there will be lots of jobs in that area, okay? So the big question for me, well, it was easy for the Monti government. It was technocrats in a crazy moment of the country. I have been working on these thanks to people like Andres and many others in Europe. I've been working with Danuta. I mean, it was, but why did he survive? And I try to answer this question. I put it to you because I think when we draw policies, we need to ask why should the Welsh or the British government want to do a policy of this kind, if by any chance at least one of you thinks that is worth looking into it. So there are 4 reasons for why it survived. One is because the elites are more and more concerned about the authoritarian dynamic of peripheries and rural areas. That has helped. That's helped in a tiny ministerial. This strategy has survived through 4 governments, okay? We are Italy, we're not in UK, okay? 4 governments in 4 years, okay? And many other policies have seen being killed because the new minister arrived and said, the only thing I know is that that is over. So, concern for authoritarian dynamic. A point about Riccardo. The benefits and the cost for the cities of somebody taking care, being guardian of these areas, yes, but also national identity. This is something I discovered working in these areas. I suddenly discovered that even in kind of the nastiest bureaucrat friend of mine, a sort of a cold bureaucrat has never left his office, who's sort of very self-referential, but he has a soul for this area of the country. He feels, yes, at the end of the game, what is Italy about? What is the sense of us in Italy? Italy is not very clear, it's not like you. That's why we stay in Europe more happily than you are. It is not very clear what is the sense of Italian, and it has not to do with Dante Alighieri, because each of us has got his own Dante Alighieri. But rural areas are amazingly unitarian element, and suddenly discover myself that somebody from Turin and Reggio Calabria, they can hardly speak to each other in terms of understanding the kind of problems they have. Somebody from Valmaira up in the mountains and in the Aspromonte, they can speak to each other so clearly. They speak the same language. They have the same problems. They have the same sense. So Italy has an identity in its rural areas. More, possibly. Mobilization. A lot of private and social actors were mobilized. This is a policy that opened up space for young new people, because sometimes we even called off the meeting because the mayor had convocated only the guys that we had seen around for the last 20 years. We said, the meeting is over. We are selecting the guys. We were so paternalistic that we did select ourselves 100 innovators in the region. It took a month and a half, but we did it. And obviously they are our supporters. And and so they make it more difficult. And web, internet, small local webs run by young guys having their eyes on this policy, on implementation of contract. And then the thousands mayors, it could be. Having said that, there are many lessons, size of place, this is something for geographer and everything. I can't resist thinking that there is a magic number around 30, 40,000. It seems that whenever we go beyond 50,000, we cannot do this kind of stuff. We maybe can do a place-based approach, a different version. And then suddenly I start looking, I look at you because in even urban policies, I suddenly realize that many boroughs are around 40, 45,000. It is as if there is a number around which this kind of participatory approach can actually deliver without becoming a blah blah a story, but actually pinning down people to maybe. Fragility, local coalition, I'll jump that. Weak social groups, did we always succeed in having the weak social groups speaking? Not at all. Women were lacking, as in general they are, particularly in these areas. Young people and migrants. These areas are, by the way, providing sometimes very good solutions for migrants, but it's hard to hear, and migrants do play in Italy an important role in the filière of producing milk and producing wood. Actually, they have imported from the Balkans new methodologies. It's quite amazing cultural regeneration, but it's not talked about, and the migrants will not come to the focus groups to say what they really lack. We have repeatedly failed to bring the migrants. We need more of those intermediate NGOs with which they feel more safe, if you see what I mean. They didn't feel safe enough with us, being at the end of the game government, and you know, we had all the other side. Maybe there will be police then coming after us. And then municipalities' technostructure, we knew it had to be reinforced. We did reinforce this. We underestimated how weak it was, and so the strengthening of the technostructure of this area project is still demanding. And finally, a resistance to space awareness by the national. I'll give one example, and on that I finish. Yesterday there was a very good point in the discussion on education on the resistance to adjust schools. Although I don't think that schools should be run by enterprises, but I do think that schools should produce people that are suitable for the kind of demand that there is in the place, if you want to give them a chance to stay. Otherwise, you know, if they do accounting when there is lots of demand of people working on the earth, I mean, you're an idiot. Now, there was a resistance by our national public administration to bet on these new schools, because since in Italy you cannot create a new vocational school unless you have 250 people, but the state is not ready to risk, as an entrepreneur would do, in saying we have only 130, but we have a strategy, so hopefully there will be 170. So, but the restriction of the present Italian regulation prevents the sectorial approach to actually suit the demand that has come from places. Okay, problems, advantages, you can study more if I've attracted your attention, because everything is on the web, is open data, open government, in Italian, on this web, and I thank you for the excess of time that I've taken from you.
Brilliant.